that Pierre Elliot Trudeau, then Prime Minister, would get so frazzled and angry by these questions, he would actually have to leave and go behind the House of Commons curtain and storm up and down. There was a time when I was a young man in Parliament, and I was making a lot of comments. My mouth was moving faster than my brain. You know, at that age, a platform that cuts government spending by $55 billion with less bureaucracy, less consultants, less foreign aid, less waste and mismanagement. This election comes down to one word only: change. Change, change, change. We need change. Because after a lost Liberal decade of rising cost of living and crime, we cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a real change. Change so you can afford food. Change so you can afford housing. Change so you feel safe in your country under our proud flag again. That's what this election is about. But before I get into the speech, I have to take a moment to celebrate the legend. Look at these incredible people we have here. Look at this. What a great, incredibly hardworking people of Nova Scotia, and in particular, the legendary McKay family. Give it up to the McKays. Elmer. Starting with Elmer, legendary parliamentarian, made way for Brian Mulroney, served in Parliament. He used to ask such precise and logical questions. The legend has it that Pierre Elliot Trudeau, then Prime Minister, would get so frazzled and angry by these questions, he would actually have to leave and go behind the House of Commons curtain and storm up and down in a huff. But of course, Elmer is a man of words. You know, at the last rally he attended, he suddenly took the mic away from me and began reciting a perfectly relevant excerpt of Shakespeare from the top of his head. He's been a great businessman. The MacKay family has so many generations of contribution. The stories that I hear of, generations gone by where a poor family was struggling to physically build a home with their own hands. They ran out of lumber. And one day, a big pile of 2x4s and other wood just suddenly and magically appeared on their property. And they asked the neighbors, where did it come from? Who said the MacKay family heard that you run out of lumber, and of course they're in the lumber business, and so they dropped it off. And the family said, well, why did they do that? They don't even know me. But because that's what the MacKays do. Isn't that the truth? The stories of single mothers and widows who were hungry and unable to buy a turkey dinner before Thanksgiving, and a ring at the doorbell would hit, and all of a sudden there would be a nice, beautiful frozen turkey left there by their then Member of Parliament. And then we've got Peter MacKay, the great Harper-era minister who served our country so well for so long, Defense Minister, Justice Minister, Foreign Affairs Minister. You know, there was a time when I was a young man in Parliament, and I was making a lot of comments. My mouth was moving faster than my brain. You know, at that age when you get involved. I got into hot water a few times, so I went and saw Peter for a little bit of mentorship. And he brought me into his office. He was very calm and stoic. And he sat me down, and behind him on the wall was a stuffed fish that he'd brought from Atlantic Canada, proudly displayed on the wall. And I said, Peter, what's your advice? And he said, well, you see that fish up there? If he'd kept his mouth shut, he'd still be alive. Peter, as you know, were you nominated in this room right here? Was this the place where you won your nomination? Mulroney was nominated here. John A. MacDonald? Okay, you didn't know John A. MacDonald. You're not that old, Peter. Peter started his campaign when he was, you were 28 when you were nominated? 30. Okay, but you looked 28 at the time. He still looks great, eh? He looks like a Roman god, this guy, or something. It's unbelievable. Peter wasn't born, by the way. He was chiseled out of a big block of marble. We're embarrassing him. When he first ran for office, he said, "We have to go visit our seniors. They built this country." And he showed up at a senior's home, and he walked up to a lady, and he said, "Do you know who I am?" And she said, "No, but if you ask the nurse, she'll tell you who you are." I think he's used that one on me a few times. But he was a great minister in our government. He gives so much wisdom, and he reminds us all of how good things were in the past and how much better they can be in the future. Peter MacKay is another reason for us to have hope. And boy, do we ever need hope these days, though. My goodness. Have you ever seen it this bad? Unbelievable. What an absolute mess the Liberals have made of our country. I need you too. I need you too. I need you to get out and vote. Have you all voted yet for a change? Well, I'll tell you why it's so important to vote. Because not only will things get worse not only will things not get better if you don't vote, they'll get a lot worse. Look at the mess we're in after the lost Liberal decade. Everything costs more. Food prices have risen 37% faster in Canada than they did in the United States over the last 5 years, while Mark Carney was Justin Trudeau's top economic advisor. Housing costs have doubled after out-of-control immigration and money printing extremely goosed the demand, while government bureaucracy blocked home building, in other words, stopping supply. Imagine, if government subsidizes the demand for something and then blocks the supply of that same thing, the laws of economics dictate that it's going to become extremely unaffordable. So, the major causes of this were the immigration minister and the housing minister. And it turns out it's the same guy. One guy. Right. So Sean Fraser, as the immigration minister, increases our population growth by literally 200% to 1.3 million people in a time when we're only building about 200,000 homes. And then, as a punishment for that failure, that catastrophic mistake, they then move him over to make him housing minister, where he gives us the single most unaffordable housing market in the history of the country and among all G7 nations. And, you know, we thought that maybe he had a little bit of shame. He was going to go into retirement. As you would think, after a catastrophic record of ruining both immigration and housing, he would want to disappear quietly into obscurity. But then Mark Carney said, "The kind of guy who ruins housing and immigration is exactly the kind of guy I need back in my cabinet." And that's all you need to know about Mark Carney. Now, Liberals would like you to forget about the lost Liberal decade. They say, you know, let's just ignore it ever happened. Pretend it wasn't there, even though all the same Liberal MPs, Liberal ministers, Liberal advisors are still running the Liberal show. But I'm here to tell you that that Liberal record is not just about the past. It's about a very dark future if they're reelected. Now, don't take my word for it. Look at this report. This is from the Government of Canada. It's got the logo of the government right here. Here, look real close so the media can't deny that it comes from the government. It says Canada at the bottom. It's got the Canada logo. And the government has confirmed this is a real document. And the reason I have to say that is because its findings are so horrific. They predict what Canada will look like on the current trajectory. Now let me turn to page 3, and the section is actually entitled, and I'm quoting here, "More Snakes Than Ladders." I'm not kidding. That's what they wrote. It's written down right here. In 2040, they predict, upward social mobility is almost unheard of in Canada. Hardly anyone believes they can build a better life for themselves or their children through their own efforts. However, many worry about sliding down the social order. Now, this is bureaucraties. but I can translate. I've been reading bureaucracies in the government for long enough. What this means is, no matter how hard you work, you won't be able to get ahead. In fact, you might start falling behind. Then they say that pursuing a post-secondary education will no longer be considered a reliable path to social mobility. In other words, you can study all you want, you can learn all you want, you still won't get ahead. Then they say, in 2040, people see inheritance as the only way to get ahead. Society, listen to this, society, and I'm quoting, society increasingly resembles an aristocracy. Wealth and status pass down the generations. Family background, especially owning property, divides the haves and the have-nots. In 2040, people rarely mix with others of different socioeconomic status. In other words, there's a tiny group of aristocrats on the top, and everyone else is left behind. They don't even talk to each other. Then they go on to say in this report, the Canadian economy could shrink and become less predictable. Capital for investment in new enterprises may concentrate in the hands of a small number of very wealthy older people. Property ownership, and by extension wealth, may become even more concentrated if generations abandon the idea of single-family dwellings in favor of renting or forming alternative households. That's exactly the Liberal ideology, that nobody should own a home, everyone should just be stuck paying exorbitant rents in properties not big enough to raise families. Then they say people's mental health will suffer. More people struggle to afford rent, bills, and groceries. The resulting stress could worsen mental health challenges. This would increase demand for social services. Now, this last line is really most startling of all. They believe that people might have to look for alternative means of seeking sustenance, because food prices will become so unaffordable that no longer will working class people be able to go to the grocery store anymore. So we will go from what we have now, which is people go up to the till, and when they're paying, they actually have to put things back in the bag and send them back because the bank account is emptied before they've gotten through the entire bill. Worse than that, they say people will have to hunt, fish, and forage on public lands and waterways without reference to regulations. In other words, people will be in a position where they will need to feed themselves. That's right. That's a good point. You know, it's funny. You make a great point. We were on CBC the other day, had a panel about this report. And of course, the CBC talking head was saying, oh, come on, this is so exaggerated. That's never going to happen in Canada. And to her credit, one of the Globe and Mail reporters said, wait a sec here, for a lot of Canadians, this is the way it is right now. My friends, there are people in this country just hanging on by a thread, and it is for those people that we are fighting. We are here to give them hope and change and a better future. And we have the plan to do it. This is it. The Change book. Change. Change for an affordable life. Change for safe streets. Change for Canada First is our platform, newly released. A platform that cuts government spending by $55 billion with less bureaucracy, less consultants, less foreign aid, less waste and mismanagement. To bring down the deficit by 70%, reducing the amount we're adding onto our debt. We will cut income tax by 15% so your hard work pays off again. We will axe the sales tax on new homes so that you can save money and buy a place and put a roof over your head. And we will lock up the violent criminals the Liberals have put on the streets so you are safe in your community.